Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. So, we are continuing our Greatness in Men series, and this article is entitled Greatness in Men, Joseph Fielding Smith, by Bryant S. Hinckley, President of Liberty Stake. So this article is on Joseph Fielding Smith in 1932. He had been an apostle for a few years, but he hadn't been president of the church. He became president of the church in 1970. So, and he was really old at the time. If I remember correctly, he had broken some kind of record for being like the oldest president of the church before his death. So we are definitely going to have to expand on this article, and I will fact check everything at the end as well. But we're not going to get anywhere near his entire life from this one article written in 1932. So, yeah, we're going to have to definitely expound on that. So Joseph Fielding Smith was the son of Joseph F. Smith, who was the son of Hiram Smith. And he also was the brother of Hiram M. Smith, who we have already discussed. And at this point was long dead. He had died in 1918. So, yeah, he was the younger brother. Hiram M. Smith was the oldest. Anyways, I thought you might find that tidbit interesting. If you haven't seen my article on Hiram M. Smith, please go check it out, because honestly, he's one of those people that you should know. If you don't know about him, you should. Yeah, that is my opinion. But anyways, let's take a look at this article. Joseph Fielding Smith. What do I know about him? He was originally called Joseph F. Smith Jr. because he has the same name as his father. But then after the death of his father, they started referring to him as Joseph Fielding Smith, just to distinguish him from his father a little bit, but without making it, attacking on the junior all the time. So I'm wondering if that annoyed him when when his father was still alive. Either way, I understand that he was a very faithful person and that he believed really strongly in creationism as opposed to evolution. He was an opposer of evolution, but I don't know that much more about the things that were important to him. So let's find out, yeah? So here's a quote at the beginning, a little blurb. Besides the picture President Hinckley gives of the more or less public activity of the subject of this article, the reader will find a more intimate word portrait given by the woman in all the world who knows him best. Both portraits are the sort of any man might like to draw from him. Woman who knows him best. So I'm assuming that is his wife? I hope so, anyway. All right, so there's a picture. This is Joseph Fielding Smith. This is not the picture most of us know of him, but it is a picture of him when he was younger, yeah? Anyways, okay, the picture of a sturdy boy standing in a manger, patiently struggling to get a bridle over the ears of a docile but tricky workhorse is familiar to many of us. Is it? The boy is the interesting figure in the picture, for a boy is a bundle of possibilities. Time and experience teaches one respect for boys in general. In this land of opportunity, no one can tell where a few years will take a boy if he is intelligent, honest, and ambitious. Okay, a little bit of philosophy to start out the article, I guess. Random. Perhaps someday you will want to borrow money, and the boy, who you knew will name the terms and tell you where to sign on the dotted line. He may sit in judgment upon your behavior and decide your case in court. He may look into your fevered face and prescribe bitter doses, or by the skillful use of his knife save your life. He may represent you in the legislative halls of your country, or fight your battles on foreign soil. The barefoot boy with sun-tanned face and wind-scorched lips may someday stand upon the platform and with reason and eloquence inspire you to higher and better things. I think they mean platform, yeah? Yes, a boy is a bundle of possibilities. All right, can we move past the generalizations? Can we talk about Joseph Fielding Smith now? All right, Joseph Fielding Smith, as a boy, harnessed the family horse when he had to stand on a box to do it, and took his devoted mother, Julina Lamson Smith, on many an errand of mercy and relief. The spirit of service which he learned in those days has grown stronger and brighter with the years. In his 34th year he was ordained an apostle. However, this was not the beginning of his service, for all his days he had been active in the church. At least we're on the subject, yeah. In his 23rd year he went on a mission to Great Britain, returning 2 years later, after which he served as a home missionary, a high counselor, and in other capacities in the Salt Lake Stake of Zion. At a tender age he manifested a real interest in church history, and found great delight in studying the principles of the gospel and doctrines of the church. Naturally, he went to his father with many questions. No boy ever had a better teacher of the glorious truths of Mormonism than he had in the person of his distinguished father. This dispensation has produced few, if any, abler or more militant defenders of the faith of this people than President Joseph F. Smith. He possessed not only a clear and... Hang on, are we talking about this guy or are you talking about his father? I think we're talking about his father. Okay, this dispensation has produced few, if any, abler or more militant defenders of the faith of his people than President Joseph F. Smith. He possessed not only a clear and profound knowledge of the fundamental principles of the gospel of the Master, but he had in his soul a flaming conviction of their divinity. No mortal could bear this testimony with more convincing power than he could. He was not only a great father and a mighty preacher of righteousness, but he typified our loftiest conception of a real man, a man whose convictions were backed by a loyalty and a consecrated devotion to the truth that was never challenged by friend or foe. It is indeed a priceless thing for any boy to have such a teacher. There was a gentleness and nobility, a solidity and sweetness, an intelligence and capacity compounded in the character of Joseph F. Smith, which won your confidence and secured your everlasting allegiance. President Smith will go down in history as a great spiritual leader. His fidelity to his friends was supreme, his faith flawless, his course colossal, a stranger to fear and free from guile. All of these heroic virtues were not only bred in Joseph Fielding, but cultivated through contact with his noble father. No son of President Joseph F. Smith could be lacking in courage or guilty of cowardice and still be true to his father. All his sons have reverential regard for their father, as they should have. Joseph Fielding pays this sincere tribute to him. Hang on. Like, they're talking about courage. Okay, so his children had to be courageous. Why? Like, did they, live on a precipice? Or did they, you know what I mean? Like, what? I don't understand why that was, so incredibly essential. My father was the most tender-hearted man I ever knew. His sympathy was perpetually drawn out towards the downtrodden and oppressed. Especially was his love extended towards little children. He loved them all and could not bear to see them wrongfully treated. This sympathy and tenderness was extended towards the animal kingdom. I never could see why a man should be imbued with a bloodthirsty desire to kill and destroy animal life. I think it is wicked for men to thirst in their souls to kill almost everything which possesses animal life, was his constant teaching by example and precept. As a preacher of righteousness, the sincerity of his words penetrated the souls of men. He spoke as one having authority, and with a firmness, conviction, and confidence begotten of a knowledge of the truth. There was no element of doubt or uncertainty in his testimony. Especially was this so when he spoke of the divinity of our Savior or the mission of the prophet Joseph Smith. It has sunk deep into my heart. It fills every fiber of my soul, so that I say before this people, and would be pleased to have the privilege of saying it before the whole world, that God has revealed unto me that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Redeemer of the world, that Joseph Smith is, was, and always will be a prophet of God, ordained to stand at the head of the dispensation of the fullness of times, the keys of which were given to him, and he will hold them until the winding up scene. I know as I live that this is true, and I bear my testimony to his truth. Such was the nature of his testimony. Among my fondest memories are the hours I have spent by his side discussing principles of the gospel and receiving instruction as only he could give it. In this way, the foundation for my own knowledge was laid in truth, so that I too can say, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that Joseph Smith is, was, and always will be a prophet of the living God. So I didn't want to interrupt the quote, but this is about Joseph F. Smith. That's his father. Why are they talking so much about his father? Wish they would focus a little more on him. Now, I understand that he's the one who said this, but it's about his father. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's a little annoying to me. Come on, focus. Anyways, I think that Joseph F. Smith was a very tender-hearted person. a kind-hearted, gentle person. And he was very affectionate with his children. He loved to hug them and cuddle them, and he would always give his boys kisses, even as adults, when he saw them. And they loved him so much, they loved to visit him. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear Joseph Fielding Smith say this about Joseph F. Smith, because I heard that Joseph F. Smith was like that. Hiram M. Smith said similar things. So, I mean, it sounds pretty consistent to me. Anyways, there's a picture here. This is Ethel G. Reynolds Smith. I am assuming that is his wife, although they haven't mentioned it yet. All right. In his boyhood days, Joseph Fielding herded cows near the Jordan River and learned to swim in its sluggish and dangerous waters. With his brothers, he worked on a farm in Taylorsville, Utah. Farm experiences teach boys to be resourceful and patient. And we're back to generalities. Both of these virtues are indispensable in the development of character. In his youth, he played baseball and other games common to those times. For almost a score of years, he has consistently and with regularity played baseball in the Deseret Gymnasium. Although his eyesight is not perfect, really, he has bad eyesight? He plays the game skillfully and with great zest. Thousands of people have listened to him speak, but very few are familiar with the genial smile which lights up his countenance when he plays. Play reveals the real man as nothing else does. Neither veneer nor parade behavior carry over in the contest of a real game. To know Joseph Fielding Smith, you must play with him, live with him. In answer to this question put to his wife, "Will you tell us something about the man you know?" she said. "You ask me to tell you of the man I know. I have often thought when he is gone people will say, 'He is a very good man, sincere, orthodox, etc.' They will speak of him as the public knows him. But the man they have in mind is very different from the man I know. The man I know is a kind, loving husband and father, whose greatest ambition in life is to make his family happy. Entirely forgetful of self in his efforts to do this, he is the man that lulls to sleep the fretful child, who tells bedtime stories to the little ones, who is never too tired or too busy to sit up late at night or to get up early in the morning to help the older children solve perplexing school problems. When illness comes, the man I know watches tenderly over the afflicted one and waits upon him. It is their father for whom they cry, feeling his presence a panacea for all ills. It is his hands that bind up the wounds, his arms that give courage to the sufferer, his voice that remonstrates with them gently when they err, until it becomes their happiness to do the thing that will make him happy. The man I know is the most gentle, and if he feels that he has been unjust to anyone, the distance is never too far for him to go and, with loving words and kind deeds, erase the hurt. Wow! He welcomes gladly the young people to his home and is never happier than when discussing with them topics of the day, sports, or whatever interests them most. He enjoys a good story and is quick to see the humor of the situation, to laugh and to be laughed at, always willing to join in any wholesome activity. The man I know is unselfish, uncomplaining, considerate, thoughtful, sympathetic, doing everything within his power to make life a supreme joy for his loved ones. That is the man I know. Wow, that's amazing. I think that gives us more insight into his character than anything else. I mean, gentle and kind and always having a pleasant thought and willing to correct himself. Like that indicates quite a bit of humility. Like, wow, that's impressive. I'm just really blown away because, I mean, how many people do you know like that? I don't really know many. Like, super kind and gentle and loving and always, like, willing to correct themselves. Like, if they found out that they did anything that wasn't just to someone, that they would go great lengths to correct it. Like, that is really impressive. That I feel like that's the kind of person we should all strive to be, aspire to be, you know? I'm really impressed with him so far, like just based on that description alone. I hope it's consistent in his life, but like that is really impressive to get to that point. In 1898, Joseph Fielding Smith married Louis E. Shirtliff, daughter of Louis W. Shirtliff of Ogden, a woman of singular sweetness and strength of character. 10 years later, she died, leaving 2 daughters, Josephine and Julina. He subsequently married Ethel G. Reynolds, daughter of the late George Reynolds, who is the mother of 5 sons and 4 daughters. Okay, so he had 9 children with her and 2 with the other, so he's 11. She manages with ability her household and is an active and valued member of the General Board of Relief Society. She is not only a woman of refinement and capacity, but a technician in the fine art of homemaking. I think it's so funny when they say stuff like that. A technician in the fine art of homemaking. Okay. Yeah. It's probably true, especially when you have that many children, but like, it's just very funny the way they word it. It's like the author doesn't quite know how to explain that she's a good wife and mother. So he says something like that, yeah? The children of this family are prominent in educational matters, and they know how to work and how to carry responsibilities. In all respects, this is a brilliant and superior family, a distinct credit to the state and to the church to which they belong. To the state, huh? Joseph Fielding Smith is gifted with an unusual spiritual insight and has a profound interest in things spiritual. Through diligent study and patient research, he has developed an understanding of the doctrines of the church and a comprehension of the magnitude of the gospel, which has made him an authority in this field. You trust him because of the soundness of his judgment and the wisdom of his religious teachings. He belongs to the school of fundamentalists. That's not necessarily a good thing. He stands for the worship of the true and living God as taught by the Scriptures and as revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith. He is never harassed with doubts or disturbed with skepticism concerning the fundamental principles of the religion of the Latter-day Saints. His faith rests upon a sincere foundation, a foundation that can never be disturbed by the trials of adversity or the disintegrating forces of luxury. His vision is as clear and his faith is as perfect as that of the ancient prophets. It can be said of Joseph Fielding Smith as it was of Nathanael of old, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." And he could exclaim with Joshua, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And there's a picture. It says David A. left and Joseph Fielding right on the handball court. So apparently he plays handball. That's a little unusual. I don't know that many people that play handball, yeah. Although a comparatively young man, he has made some notable and valuable contributions to the literature of the Church and has established himself as an authority on the doctrines and practices of the Church. He is the author of the following books and pamphlets. Okay, we may have heard of some of these, yeah? Blood Atonement and Origin of Plural Marriage. I've never heard of that one. The Origin of the Reorganized Church and the Question of Succession. Interesting. That was about his second cousins, yeah? The Essentials of Church History, Elijah the Prophet and His Mission, Reorganized Church versus Salvation for the Dead. Why did he write so much about it? I guess it was an interest of his. Salvation Universal, The Smiths of Topsfield. Okay, that's about his own family history, yeah? The Way to Perfection. Okay. He is one of the best informed men among us on the historical and doctrinal phases of Mormonism. He has a narrative style in his writing which is clear and interesting. He is a fearless defender of the faith and a militant preacher of righteousness. The abiding sentiments of his soul are gentleness, sincerity, and friendliness. He believes so intensely in the principles which he preaches that we fear his attitude is sometimes misunderstood. No matter how favorably one may be impressed with the public utterances or how much they may be influenced by the writings of Joseph Fielding Smith, to know him personally and intimately, to work with him, to play with him, to become acquainted with his home life, with his solicitude for his children, with his devotion to his wife, with his kindness toward his employees, to know the genuineness and depths of his friendship, the strength and sweetness of his character, is to know his real worth as a man. He has a native modesty and reserve which may make it difficult for him to mingle freely with some people, really, especially strangers. Okay. He is sincerely affectionate but never gushes. The current of his friendship runs deep and strong and quiet. To know him at intimate range is to love him. He is not a recluse but essentially a student and devotes every spare minute to reading and research. His life is a busy and a happy one, full of everyday kindness. I'm sorry, I'm slightly distracted because he's shy around strangers and he spends a lot of time reading. that's a little bit socially awkward, is it not? It makes me wonder if he's not a touch on the spectrum. I don't know for sure, obviously, I'm just speculating. But yeah, I find that an interesting question. Just going to throw that into the universe. The work which he is doing brings him to genuine satisfaction. Didn't I say that about Joseph F. Smith? That I thought he might be on the spectrum? Because he had kind of a blank face. He very rarely smiled. People, they even said that, even though he's very affectionate and loving, that he almost never smiled. And that's made me wonder if he wasn't on the spectrum. That's an interesting question. So was his son as well? Like, maybe slightly. Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously they weren't very high needs, but like, I find that very interesting to think about today, considering that it wasn't really a thing back then to get a diagnosis. So, plus it didn't sound like they needed one necessarily, since they didn't need accommodations. But it is an interesting question to think about. The work which he is doing brings him genuine satisfaction. He is a historian of the church, first counselor in the presidency of the Salt Lake Temple, vice president and treasurer of the Genealogical Society of Utah. He was the first editor and business manager of the Utah Genealogical Historical Magazine, published in January 1910. Yeah, sounds like an interest of his, yeah. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Brigham Young University and the Church Board of Education, director of the Beneficial Life Insurance Company, and of Zion Savings Bank and Trust Company. All of these are fairly typical, except for maybe the genealogical stuff of, like, most of the general authorities. Like, I've said this so many times, that like, the only one that surprises me is that ZCMI isn't on there. Alright. Outside the service which he is called upon to render as an apostle, his major responsibility is directing the work in the historian's office, where nearly a score of men and women are kept busy carrying on the work. The office of church historian and general church recorder is an old one, and an important one. It has existed since the organization of the church. It is interesting to note the men who have served in this position. The records show that Oliver Cowdery occupied this position from 1830 to 1831, John Whitmer from 1831 to 1838, Willard Richards from 1842 to 1854, George A. Smith from 1854 to 1870, Orson Pratt from 1873 to 1881, Wilford Woodruff 1883 to 1889, Franklin D. Richards 1889 to 1899, Anton H. Lund 1900 to 1921, Joseph Fielding Smith 1921 to the present time. I actually find that very helpful that he just listed all the church historians. Yeah, maybe I'll add that to my website. We'll see. But I don't have it up right now. But that's interesting that, like, general church historian. I wonder if that's still a calling today. I'll have to look that up later. During these years, many other men have assisted as recorders and assistant historians, among whom are George W. Robinson. Oh, now we're going to list the assistant historians? Okay. George W. Robinson, John Corll, Elias Higbee, Robert B. Thompson, James Sloan, Albert Carrington, Robert L. Campbell, John Jacques, A. Milton Musser, Andrew Jensen. I knew about Andrew Jensen. Charles W. Penrose. I knew about him too. Orson F. Whitney. B. H. Roberts. Another logical one. Junius F. Wells, and A. William Lund. Okay, then. Through this office, the church has sought to preserve all important documents, letters, books, pamphlets, etc. pertaining to the church. An endeavor has been made to obtain books written by non-Mormons both for and against the church. All records of wards, stakes, and missions are filed in this office, with a history of all the settlements made by the church and its members. A daily journal recording all important events pertaining to the church and to civil affairs is compiled and kept in this office. An effort has been made to gather pictures of the leading brethren and sisters, the church edifices, and of historical incidents. This gallery has already come to be a very attractive feature of the historian's office. A visit impresses one with the character and quality of the leadership of this people from the beginning. I mean, that's very important, yes, to have decent historical records, and it's very relevant to what I do. So, yeah. All right, let's take a look at some pictures. It looks like we got some childhood pictures here. Joseph Fielding in dresses. Well, that was really common back then if a child was basically too small to walk very steadily, then they put them in dresses, and it was just a way to keep their legs warm so that They move around a lot, and also it would be easier to change them, So it was really common just to put all babies in dresses. This is just baby clothes at the time. Julina L. Smith, it's his mother. I believe that's the same person who is the mother of Hiram M. Smith. I'll have to look that up to be sure. Is it Julina or Julina? I'm not actually sure. If you know the correct pronunciation of that name, please put it in the comments below, because I'm not 100% if that I is pronounced I or E. Yeah? All right, here's another picture. George, Joseph, and David A. So Joseph is the one standing. Joseph Fielding, I'm assuming that's him, is the one standing with his arms crossed. Well, I guess they're all standing, but he's in the middle. Anyway, he's the tallest. And then this picture is President Joseph F. Smith and his son, Joseph Fielding. I guess because he was a junior, so they had a picture or a portrait or something taken of them. Cool. He was a cute little kid. Okay. One of the impressive lessons of all history is that righteousness exalteth the nation, and sin is a reproach to any people. Joseph Fielding is a crusader against iniquity and against the violation of any principle that would bring remorse or discomfort upon the people. He loves humanity and has sublime faith in the saving power of the principles which he preaches. Back of all his endeavors is a deep desire to help mankind. No one who understands him could question for a moment the rectitude of his intentions, nor the wisdom of the words which he utters. So he speaks very logically, yeah? Thoughtful people can have little faith in the permanence of any civilization, church, or organization if depravity becomes prevalent among its members. This is the burden of his message, the motive of all he says. Joseph Fielding Smith is strong in the common virtues which underlie every sound life, honest, benevolent, dependable, and God-fearing, robust in intellect, vigorous in body, clear in his convictions, unyielding in his purposes, sound in his thinking, pure and lofty in his aims, with a simplicity and sweetness permeating it all that marks a noble character. He has the endowments that eminently fit him for the great apostolic office which he holds and honors. That's the end of the article. Surprised me a little bit, because usually I have to go to the next page, go to another page on these. So, but this one's not split up. So, yeah. It's a lot of very high praise. So they didn't really say anything at all that's negative. Also, I'm trying to read between the lines and figure out, a little bit more about him, but I feel like they didn't really allow that. Anything that was controversial, they didn't say. So, the only thing controversial I know about him was that he didn't believe in evolution. So, let's take a look at his Wikipedia page. And I will reiterate for the 100 millionth time, the reason I use Wikipedia as a second source is because this is a YouTube channel. And in case you didn't know that, this is a YouTube video. It is not a book. I am not writing a scholarly article. It's not that big a deal. Wikipedia is simply a second source. All right. Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. Now, the reason they said that is because his father's also named Joseph Fielding Smith. Anyways. Also, there's another Joseph Fielding Smith that I would love to talk about at some point, who is presiding patriarch. Because that is a really interesting story. It's really interesting. And I think that you might find that interesting as well. Anyways, but I hope that we get to it. Either way, don't get confused, because there's so many people named Joseph Fielding Smith. So yes, his father was senior, he was junior. Also, his father went by Joseph F. Smith, and he went by Joseph Fielding Smith. Okay, he was born July 19th, 1876, which the article did not mention. Okay, and he died July 2nd, 1972. So, was an American religious leader and writer who served as the 10th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1970 until his death in 1972. Yeah, and he died at, age 95. So, yeah, I think that he was the oldest president of the church, although I'm not 100% sure. At the time. He no longer is, by the way, because the current president of the church, by the time this goes out, will have already celebrated his 100th birthday. 100. That's crazy. He was the son of the former church president, Joseph F. Smith, and the great-nephew of church founder Joseph Smith. Yeah. because his grandfather was Hiram. Yeah. Smith was named to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1910, when his father was the church's president. Yep. When Smith became president of the church, he was 93 years and 6 months. He began his presidential term at an older age than any other president in church history. Yeah, crazy, right? He was quite old. In fact, they were kind of surprised that he had lived that long. Smith's tenure as president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles from 1951 to 1970 is the third longest in church history. He served in that capacity during the entire presidency of David O. McKay. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Smith spent some of his years among the 12 apostles as church historian and recorder. Yeah, they mentioned that. He was a religious scholar and a prolific writer. Many of his works are used as references for church members. Doctrinally, Smith was known for rigid orthodoxy and as an arch conservative in his views on evolution, and race, really, although it has been said that age had softened him, and as a result he put up less resistance to reforms by the time he had become president. Okay. Like, orthodoxy is usually not considered terribly positive, very resistant to change. I don't know, so we'll see, because the article was so very positive about him. But now it's like, no, he was super orthodox. It's like, oh, really? They didn't even mention that. Early life. Smith was born in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory on July 19th, 1876. Oh, okay, so it's not the same mother as Hiram M. As the first son of Julina Lamson Smith, the second wife and the first plural wife of Joseph F. Smith, and a member of the Quorum of the 12. Okay. By agreement between his parents, Smith was given his father's name, even though Joseph F. Smith's third and fourth wives had previously had sons. Yeah. So who cares? Like, you just pick one that you're going to name after yourself. As long as not everybody has the same name, it's all good. Growing up, Smith lived in his father's large family home at 333 West, 100 North in Salt Lake City. The house was opposite the original campus of the University of Deseret, now modern University of Utah, on a site now occupied by Ensign College. He also often worked on the family farm in Taylorsville, Utah as a child. Yeah, they did mention Taylorsville. In January 1879, when Smith was 2 years old, the U.S. Supreme Court in Reynolds v. United States upheld the constitutionality of the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act of 1862, which had criminalized the Mormon practice of plural marriage. Due to aggressive federal enforcement of this rule, as well as of the Edmunds Act of 1882 and the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887, many LDS church leaders, including Smith's father, were either imprisoned or forced into hiding and exile during most of the 1880s. Yeah, I know that. There's a picture of Joseph F. Smith in a prison uniform, I'm pretty sure. Smith's father, as the keeper of the records of the endowment house, felt a special need to avoid capture since the records would allow the federal authorities to easily prove polygamy charges against certain Latter-day Saint men. In January 1885, Smith's parents and his younger sister Julina left for the Sandwich Islands, modern Hawaii, where Smith's father had served a mission as a teenager in the 1850s. Now, I knew that he had served there, but, I didn't know that he took his whole family. Oh, and not the whole family, I guess. Smith's parents and younger sister. In their absence, Smith continued to live in the family home with his brothers and sisters and his father's other wives, whom he lovingly called aunties. That's kind of cute. Smith's mother returned to Salt Lake City in 1887, followed later by his father. I didn't know he went to Hawaii. That's really crazy. I mean, I knew that he spoke Hawaiian, though. He speaks fluent Hawaiian, and he had served his mission there, and he loved it. So maybe he just wanted to go back. Even after his return, Joseph F. Smith was unable to openly visit and care for his wives and children until receiving a presidential pardon from U.S. President Benjamin Harrison in September 1891. Really? Smith's mother worked as a midwife. Wow, I didn't know that either, to help provide for the family, and delivered nearly 1,000 babies in her career without ever having a mother or infant die in childbirth. That is amazing. Now, obviously, there's a certain level of coincidence there, but obviously also a certain level of skill. Like, you can't save every life, but if you are able to save the majority, that's awesome. That's amazing. As a boy, Smith often drove his mother by wagon to the various deliveries that she attended in Salt Lake City. Cool. Smith's primary schooling took place in ward schools, which in the 19th century were semi-formal schools run by members of each ward, which taught traditional, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. As a teenager, Smith completed 2 years of study at the Latter-day Saint College, an institution equivalent to a modern U.S. high school, which provided courses in the basic areas of mathematics, geography, history, basic science, and penmanship. Because, penmanship is like the most important thing ever. After leaving the college, Smith began working as a stock clerk doing manual labor at ZCMI to supplement the family's income. See, they didn't mention any of this. I'm a little annoyed, because this is interesting. Smith was present in the large assembly room of the Salt Lake Temple for its dedication on April 6, 1893, by church president Wilford Woodruff. Well, that's kind of cool. Family and personal life. Smith married his first wife, Amelia? I guess it's Amila? I don't know how it's pronounced. Amila, I think it is. Shirtliff, born June 16, 1876, on April 26, 1898. In March 1899, Church President Lorenzo Snow called him on a mission to Great Britain, which he completed. See, they didn't mention this either! I'm so annoyed. May 1899 to July 1901, leaving Louis in Salt Lake City. Why did they call her Louis when they just said she went by Amila? Ugh, that's annoying. Use people's chosen names, please. In Salt Lake City. On May 12, 1899, Smith was set apart as a missionary and ordained to 70 by his father. A small group of missionaries, including Smith and his older brother, Joseph Richards Smith. Are you kidding? He has a brother named Joseph? Maybe that's what they meant when they said about his third and fourth wives having children, having boys before him. Maybe that's what they meant. Left the next day for England. He has another brother named Joseph. Mind blown. Okay, after his return from the British mission, Smith and his wife had 2 daughters, Josephine and Julina. Well, they like their J names, don't they? Emila, died of complications of a third pregnancy on March 28, 1908. For part of this time, Smith was a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Really? For part of that time that Evan Stevens was the conductor. I didn't know that at all. He was in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir? But I love how they threw that in after they just said that his wife died from complications of childbirth. Slightly ironic since his mother was a midwife. I wonder if she delivered the birth. But of course, like I said, you can't prevent every death. Not every death is preventable. So it's possible that they just couldn't do anything for her. Or maybe it didn't get there on time. Also a possibility. Smith married Ethel Georgina Reynolds, born October 23rd, 1889. The daughter... Hang on. Was that... Okay, she was a touch younger than his first wife. She was several years younger. 13? Yeah. The daughter of prominent LDS church leader George Reynolds on November 2nd, 1908. Oh, she was quite young. She was 19. Holy cow. She was 19 when they got married. Okay, I take it back. That's a bit of an age gap. Okay. They had 4 girls, Emily, Naomi, Lois, and Amelia, and 5 boys. Joseph Fielding, often called Joseph Fielding Smith Jr., although he's technically the 3rd, yeah? Lewis Warren, George Reynolds, Douglas Allen, and Milton Edmund. Oh, George Reynolds was named after his grandfather. Their youngest daughter, Amelia, married Bruce R. McConkie, who was named to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles shortly after Smith's death. Ethel died of a cerebral hemorrhage on August 26, 1937, at age 47. Jeez, that's young. Holy cow. I'll bet she left behind some minor children. That's crazy. So that was his second wife, yeah? But he'd only ever married one wife at a time. He wasn't a polygamist. Ethel had specifically requested that Jessie Ella Evans, December 29, 1902 to August 2, 1971, sing at her funeral. Evans, born to Jonathan Evans and Janet Buchanan Evans, had joined the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in 1918, was a member of the American Light Opera Company 1923 to 27, and was the Salt Lake County recorder. Why does her name ring a bell? In November 1937, Evans and Smith were engaged to be married. In April 12, 1938, Smith married Evans in the Salt Lake Temple. And she was 36. And how old was he? 1938, 1876. Gosh, he was in his 60s. 62 and 36. That's quite the age gap. Smith married Evans in the Salt Lake Temple. The marriage was performed by Heber J. Grant. The couple had no children, and Jesse died on August 2nd, 1971. Well, they don't need children because he already has 11. Yeah? Gosh. Church service. After completing his mission in 1901, Smith began working in the office of church historian and recorder. In 1906, he was given the position of assistant church historian. He wrote his first doctrinal book, The Origins of the Reorganized Church and the Question of Succession, in 1909, to defend the LDS Church against the recent proselytizing by missionaries for the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our LDS Church in Utah. And today they are called Community of Christ, so get it right. He was the acting recorder in 1910 General Conference when he was called as an apostle. Acting recorder, was he really? I wonder why. Like, people who are recorders tend to be good at shorthand. Was he good at shorthand? Or did they record it on, like, record at that point? Like, did they have a little record player recorder thing? You could tell I don't know how records work, but I'm assuming that that's a thing. Prior to his call as a general authority, Smith served as the secretary and treasurer of the Genealogical Society of Utah. That article mentioned that. In 1921, Smith assumed the office of church historian and recorder, which he held until 1970, when he became president of the church. That is really impressive. Before 1910, Smith was a member of a stake high council and a home missionary, somewhat similar to a modern ward missionary. He also served as the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association General Board. Early in his apostleship, his creationist views, I mentioned this, and the dispute between Mormonism's biblical teachings on the theory of evolution brought him attention. See, Mormonism and evolution. Smith authored the book, Man, His Origin and Destiny, on the subject and unsuccessfully tried to make it the basis of a course of study at the church seminaries. He's like, everybody should believe this. That's so funny. The book was met with disapproval from church president David O. McKay, who made it clear that the book was unauthorized by the church and was not to be taken as reflecting church doctrine. Gosh, that's so awesome. He's like, no, that is not church doctrine. Jeez. However, because Smith was the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles at the time of publication and later became president of the church, his views carried substantial weight with the general church membership and grew to be accepted by a significant portion. That's hilarious to me. Like, oh gosh, we're going to believe in creationism because one person said it, you know? Even though the church itself, as a body, never condoned it. That's funny. So if ever you thought that that was doctrinal, it's not. Yeah, so stand corrected here. Ah, that's so funny. Okay, Smith lived most of his time as an apostle in Salt Lake City. He was president of the Salt Lake Temple from 1945 to 1949. During this time, Smith was sent on a tour of the church's Spanish-American mission. Before his return to Salt Lake City, he informed the president of the Arizona Temple that he would recommend to the First Presidency that the temple ceremonies be translated into Spanish. Well, it's about bloody time. Like, honestly, in the 1940s? Like, it was that late? They didn't have temple ceremonies in Spanish until the 1940s? I had no idea that it was that late. Holy cow. Smith served as president of the Genealogical Society of Utah and its successor, the Genealogical Society of the LDS Church, from 1934 to 1961. It sounds like something he was interested in, yeah. At the time of his release from this position, he had been president of the Quorum of the 12 for over a decade. During the late 1950s, Smith attempted to reduce staff turnover at the society by trying to convince the First Presidency that women should be permitted to stay on as employees after they married. That's very progressive of him. However, Smith was only able to get it changed to allow them to work 6 months past marriage. Oh, geez, that's why they had such high turnover. Because there were so many women who were interested, and then they got married, and then they got kicked out. They were no longer allowed to work. That's crazy. In early 1961, Smith preached to a stake conference congregation in Hawaii. You will never get a man into space. Wow, did he really say this? The Earth is man's sphere, and it was never intended that he should get away from it. The moon is a superior planet to the Earth, and was never intended that man should go there. You can write it down in your books that this will never happen. I had no idea. But the thing is, he lived through it. He lived through the moon landing. Oh my gosh. Earlier, Smith had written that it is doubtful that man will ever be permitted to make any instrument or ship to travel through space and visit the moon or any distant planet. At the 1970 press conference where Smith was introduced as president of the LDS Church, he was asked about these statements, and Smith reportedly responded, "Well, I was wrong, wasn't I?" That's so funny. He's like, write it down in your books. I'm making a prediction. Then it's like, less than 10 years later, he had to eat those words. That's so funny. Smith's teachings as an apostle, the 2014 curse of the... Yeah, that's not interesting, because all of the presidents of the church had that. Okay, moving on. Service abroad. Smith did at times take church assignments abroad. In 1939, he toured the missions in Europe and supervised the withdrawal of missionaries as World War II began. In 1950, Smith toured the church's Mexican mission. In July and August 1955, he made an extensive tour of Asia, during which he dedicated Korea to the Philippines for the preaching of the gospel. In 1957, he went to Europe for the dedication of the London Temple and also presided over the excommunication of several missionaries in the French mission who had apostatized. Oh, I'd heard about that. I served my mission in France. So we had heard a rumor that had happened years and years ago. Like, it was way before our time. From October 1960 to January 1961, he and Jesse toured the church missions in Central and South America. Good for him. Okay, writings. The first book Smith published was Assael Smith of Topsfield, Massachusetts, with some account of the Smith family, 1902. In all, Smith published 25 books. I love how that's all they say about writings. They said he had published 25 books, and you won't even list them. Maybe we can find a list. But he's clearly interested in genealogy. Assael Smith was his own ancestor. Yeah? Church president. Smith became LDS Church's president on January 23, 1970, following the death of David O. McKay. He chose Harold B. Lee and N. Eldon Tanner as his counselors. Smith elected not to retain Hugh B. Brown in the first presidency. According to church historian Leonard J. Arrington, Smith's age and health prevented him from having much of a supervising role during his presidency. Most work was done by his two counselors. Yeah, he was very old. If you listen to the old recordings of him speaking, he spoke very slowly. He was clearly quite weak at the end of his life. And, it was really, really difficult to listen to because of how very, very slow he spoke. Although he served as church president for less than 3 years, Smith's administration introduced several new initiatives. Area conferences were introduced, significant organizational restructuring in the church's Sunday school system, and the church's Department of Social Services occurred, and the church magazines were consolidated into the Ensign, New Era, and Friend in English, with centralized planning for all publications. His tenure was also marked by steady growth in the number of missionaries and the dedication of temples in Ogden and Provo, Utah. Death. Smith died at his home in Salt Lake City on July 2, 1972, at age 95. He attended church services with his ward that day while visiting with one of his daughters that evening. Wow, he quietly died while sitting in his favorite chair. That's kind of sweet. He was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery. That is adorable. Ancestry is not interesting to me. We've also talked about it. Works. His books. There we go. Smith, Joseph Fielding, 1957 to 1966. Answers to Gospel Questions, 5 volumes. I wonder if those are sanctified by the church, since some of the other ones were not. Yeah. Church History and Modern Revelation, being a course of study for the Melchizedek Priesthood Quorums for the year 1947. Written by the Council of the 12 Apostles. Okay, that's different. Doctrines of Salvation, Sermons and Writings of Joseph Fielding Smith, compiled by Bruce R. McConkie. That's not a book he wrote, though. It's something he said. Yeah, that was written down. Essentials in Church History, a history of the church from the birth of Joseph Smith until the present time. That sounds like something he's interested in as church historian. In 1922, he wrote that. Interesting. J.M. Heslop and Del R. Van Orden. Sorry. Joseph Fielding Smith, a prophet among the people. Okay, he didn't write that then. That's, okay, whatever. Man, His Origin and Destiny, which we've already discussed. Origin of the Reorganized Church, Deseret News, recall that those were about his cousins. The Progress of Man, Genealogical Society of Utah. The Restoration of All Things, a series of radio talks on fundamental principles of the gospel. Seek Ye Earnestly. The Signs of the Times, a series of discussions sponsored by the Sisters of the Lion House Social Center. Take Heed to Yourselves. Okay, I don't know what that's about. Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. He wrote that? Interesting. The Way to Perfection, short discourses on gospel themes. Okay. Other. Smith wrote the text to the hymn Does the Journey Seem Long?, which appears as hymn number 127 in the current English language edition of the LDS Church hymnal. Well, that's about to change since they're creating new ones now. Mormon Views on Evolution. Okay. Wow, there is a lot there. There's a lot there. Okay, so let me comment on some of it. First of all, he doesn't seem to really have had a occupation, like a career. Besides writing, I guess. I wouldn't really call that a career, though, because he seems to have done it kind of on the side. Interested in history and genealogy, very affectionate and kind, patient person, and loved to play baseball and handball. Let's see. And he had 3 wives, but never at the same time. He was not a polygamist. He was simply widowed twice. And seemed to have a greater and greater age gap with every one of his wives. So he was born in 1876. I'm going to do the math here because I think that this is kind of interesting. Okay, his first wife, I'm going to call her Amila because I'm annoyed that they keep calling her Louie, since she never went by that. If they say Amila, then that's her name, okay? Was born in the same year he was, so she was the same age as him. When they married in 1898, at the age of 22. Perfectly normal. Well, 22-year-olds getting married. I like that, okay? And then he married his second wife in 1908 when she was 19. Gosh. And he was 32. 19 and 32. That's already a concerning age gap. And then she died young. It's so weird that he outlived her because she was so much younger than him. But she died at age 47. Cerebral hemorrhage. Isn't that a stroke? Basically, I think it is, or an aneurysm or something. All right. And then he married Jessie Evans in 1938. So he was 62 and she was 36. Bigger and bigger age gaps. Now, I will say one thing. When you are older, it is harder to find somebody your own age that's single. I will give you that. And it's not as concerning considering none of them were minors when they met. You know, they weren't groomed to be the wife. But I sincerely hope that particularly his second wife, who was 19 when she got married, was felt that she was giving her full consent. That's all I'm going to say about that. While not illegal, it is a bit morally questionable. Yeah. And then she ended up having a bunch of kids, yeah? So I sincerely hope that was all with full 100% consent. Although she did give pretty high praise in the article. So I am hoping that was sincere. I can't speak to that because obviously I wasn't there and I don't know them personally. So, the thing I find funniest is his statements about getting into space and about evolution being incorrect and creationism being the only possible solution. You know, God never intended man to leave the earth, and therefore we're never going to get to the space. That's so funny. The moon is a superior planet to the earth. In what way is the moon a superior planet to the earth? Yeah, I think that all astronomers will agree the moon is definitely, solidly not superior to the earth. It's much, much simpler. It's basically a hunk of rock that's very, very dry. And that's why it still has craters, and it has no atmosphere. And there's no way life can grow on it. So how is it superior to the earth? I'm just really flabbergasted that he actually said that. clearly it's not something he knows anything about. And it's so funny. Well, I was wrong, wasn't I? Clearly. And it makes me wonder what else you were wrong about. No offense. So I feel like the doctrinal books that he wrote should be taken with a grain of salt and should not be taken as church doctrine, especially since David O. McKay came out with statements saying this is not church doctrine. Yeah? So, yeah. Make of that what you will. But I find it interesting that he made those statements just with such conviction and then was clearly incorrect. Alright, so I feel like a lot of doctrinal statements made by general authorities need to be taken with a grain of salt for that reason, you know. It has to line up with church doctrine for it to be church doctrine. Yeah, and the same thing is true with many of Bruce R. McConkie's books. What was it called? Encyclopedia of Mormonism or something like that? Mormon Doctrine. Okay. Mormon Doctrine was a controversial book because there are doctrines in it that are not from the church. So take it with a huge grain of salt. This is his person's opinion. Yeah? It is not backed by the church, and it still isn't. So this is the same kind of a thing. The Origin of Man, or whatever it was that Joseph Fielding Smith wrote, that it was not man and his origin and destiny, that it is not doctrine. So please keep that in mind when you read some of these things. I am not saying anything bad about the person because of that. Doesn't make him a bad person for being wrong. You know, everybody can be wrong at some point. I could be wrong, so could you. Yeah. Keeping that in mind, people are human, and humans make mistakes, and humans say things that are incorrect sometimes. Anyways, I thought you would be interested in that, and I found that really, really fascinating. I really loved that today, and the statements about going to the moon are hilarious, that they were contradicted like within a couple of years after he said them. It's just so funny. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.